have to start the show, as we have on so many days recently, with the news about the U.S. and China. Now, just a couple hours ago, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross confirmed what many expected to happen. The U.S. will grant another reprieve to Huawei, allowing U.S. businesses to sell to Huawei for another 90 days, extending the lifting of that previous ban. Now, many U.S. companies are still very dependent on Huawei, and Wilbur Ross said, quote, "We're giving them a little more time to wean themselves off." And yet, yesterday, President Trump also told reporters that he doesn't want U.S. companies to do business at all with Huawei, ideally. Meanwhile, Trump is still talking tough on the overall trade war. He says that the U.S. economy is healthy and that China's economy is suffering.
If I wanted to make a bad deal and settle on China, the market would go up, but it wouldn't be the right thing to do. I'm just not ready to make a deal yet. China would like to make a deal. I'm not ready.
All right, let's discuss the situation more with our friend Jess Smith, live in D.C. Hi, Jess.
Hey there. Yeah, President Trump yesterday said that he did not want to do business with Huawei because it is a national security threat. But this morning, as you mentioned, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says that the department decided that they needed more time to avoid a disruption here. They say that Huawei still represents a national security threat, and they added 46 affiliates to the entity list, but they are giving U.S. companies, they're giving Huawei 90 more days to buy equipment from U.S. companies. So November 19th will be the next big day to watch. Now, we did expect this. There were several reports out over the weekend saying that the Commerce Department would extend this license. President Trump was asked about that report yesterday, and here's what he had to say.
We're actually open not to doing business with them. So I don't know who gave the report. Now, they have little sections of Huawei like furniture and other things that we could do, but when you cut out sections, it gets very complicated. What's being sold, what's coming in. So at this moment, it looks much more like we're not going to do business. I don't want to do business at all because it's a national security threat.
As I mentioned, Commerce also added nearly 50 affiliates to the entity list. Ross said that's because he wants to make sure that there are no loopholes and that Huawei can't find a way to get around the ban. Again, this extension will last another 90 days, so we'll be watching on November 19th to see what happens. Dan?
What did he say there, Jess, that there are little corners or parts of Huawei we could continue doing business with, like furniture? Did I hear that right?
Right. Yes, he did say furniture there, and I was looking into that, trying to learn more about the furniture aspect of this, but that has been a key part of this debate, that maybe businesses can do business with Huawei if there are certain things that don't represent a national security threat. So if Huawei could buy these pieces and parts elsewhere, they could get them anyway. They're going to. We might as well let U.S. companies buy them or sell them to Huawei. That's been part of this debate, but I can say a lot of lawmakers on the Hill don't like the idea of doing any sort of business with Huawei at all. And the president there didn't sound too excited about doing any business with Huawei either. So we're going to watch to see how this plays out and how this affects trade talks and how it plays into that situation.
That's right, Jess. It'll be very interesting, and November right around the corner, so we'll see if they extend it yet again. Thanks, Jess.
Of course.
It's interesting. You wonder if there's a contradiction here. If President Trump saying yesterday, ideally we wouldn't do any business with them, well, then the very next day we extend allowing businesses in the U.S. to sell to Huawei. So how do you sort of reconcile those two things?
Well, one challenge here is I think this is inextricably tied to the Chinese trade negotiations as well. I mean, President Trump has explicitly said in the past that he is interested in discussing Huawei as part of whatever trade negotiation, is being done between the U.S. and China. So as we saw the Trump administration delay partial tariffs on a portion of some of these goods, a lot of them kind of these consumer-facing goods that some worried may have impacted the holiday season, getting pushed back from September 1st to December 15th, this kind of almost falls in line with that same timeline. 90 days is about towards the end of the year. So I'm kind of almost not surprised that this is the case. But as Jessica said, this is actually not that much of a partisan issue on Capitol Hill compared to maybe even the trade issue. There are Democrats who are actually very pro hardline stance against Huawei in this case as well. So it's actually kind of not as binary, but still kind of tied and tangential to the trade negotiation.
I think it's really interesting to look at the imbalance too, because if you look at how much of the U.S. companies are dependent on on Huawei versus the other way around, like they've said like, oh, they can just go work with some other companies, it won't matter. But in other areas of this trade war, they're looking at the shortfall, like for example the soybean, right, stopgap. They can't depend on Russia to fill that. So I think it's interesting to see how like all these moving parts are affecting this conversation.
What's funny about that is I remember back when the Huawei conversation, many tried to argue it's separate from the trade war. That's sort of over here.
For a time it was.
Yeah, and now I think we all agree, like, no, this is all part of the same issue. Even the Hong Kong protests are now really part of the same story in a sense.